yesterday. Hakoimit is a mincha lechel shiareh b'chutz. So he had a kavan of pigul of chutz lim koimai, or kazayis mishireh b'chutz, or even the kazayis of eating shirayim b'chutz would be a pigul, or lahakter koimta b'chutz, or to be makter the koimit b'chutz, or kazayis koimta b'chutz, or lahakter levaynasa b'chutz. Possible bein b'karis, because that's called pigul of chutz lim koimai, which doesn't carry a penalty of karis. How about lechel? Just to be clear, the kavanas pigul doesn't have a chi of karis. If one eats this carbon, that's where there's a chi of karis. Lechel shiareh l'mochar, oy kazayis mishireh l'mochar. Now we're talking about pigul of chutz l'zmanai. Lahakter koimta l'mochar, oy kazayis mikoimta l'mochar, oy lahakter levaynasa l'mochar. That is pigul, real pigul, the chayavin olav karis. Zakla, kol hakoimitz. Now we're listing off the 4 avodas by mincha, which parallel the avodas by a carbon. So kol hakoimitz is going to be considered the shchita. Oy noisen b'chli is going to be the kabbalah sadam. Hamoilech, which is the halacha, and hamakdir of the mincha is parallel to the zrik of a carbon. And you have kavana while you do any one of these critical avodas, lechel davar shadakir lechel, to eat shirayim that's designed to be eaten, ulahaktir davar shadakir lahaktir, or to be maktir, something that's designed to be put on the mizbeach. So in the case of the mincha, the dakir lechel is the shirayim, the dakir lahaktir is the kaimitz. In the case of a behema, the dakir lechel would be the meat of the carbon, and the dakir lahaktir would be the emurin of the carbon. And the kavanah you had was to eat them or to be makter those items, respectively. Chutlam koimai is possible. Mekares, chutlas manoi is pigul v'chayavan olav kares. I just want to point out one important thing that we're going to need later in the daf. First, the Mishnah discusses only kemitza, only a kavanah of pigul by the kemitza itself. Right? That's the first case of the Mishnah. Then, as the Mishnah expands, the Mishnah now discusses a machshav of pigul that occurred during any one of the 4 avodas. So the Reisha is speaking about only the avodah of kemitza, and the seifa, if we can call it, is referring to all of the avodas that are done by a mincha can trigger a din of pigul. Ketat karev uvavad sheyakrev or sheyakrev hamata kemitzvah. As we know with pigul, as long as there's no other problem in the processing of the carbon, then the pigul is chal. But if there was another psul that disqualified this carbon anyway, it's not pigul. Okay. Let's get into detail of what this would be. Kamatz b'shtika. He made the kemitza b'shtika without any bad machshava. Rashi says, shaloi chisha, if he didn't think at all of anything specific, it defaults to the proper kavanah, nosan bechli, or v'hoylech, or v'hikter, with a kavanah of chutz l'zmanai, which is pigul, oy shekamatz chutz l'zmanai, or the kemitza he did with a kavanah of pigul, and nosan bechli, v'hoylech, v'hikter b'shtika, but his kavanah was perfect by the other avodas, but nothing else happened, oy shekamatz v'nosan bechli, v'hoylech v'hikter chutz l'zmanai, or if the whole carbon was a chutz l'zmanai, but nothing other than the chutz l'zmanai kavanah will impact the kashrus of the carbon, that's pigul. Zeu shekarev hamater k'mitzvasi. This is a perfect example. These are perfect examples of everything is pristine and perfect about this carbon except for the machshava of pigul. Ketzat loy karev hamater k'mitzvasi. What's an example of loy karev hamater k'mitzvasi? Kamat chutz l'mkaimai. His kavanah b'shas the kemitza was chutz l'mkaimai, which would not lead to a chi of kares of pigul, and then nasan b'chli v'hoylech v'hikter, and these are all ois. Either one of these avodas, if he had a kavanah of chutz l'zmanai, oi shekamatz chutz l'zmanai, or the first avodah was with a kavanah of chutz l'zmanai, and one of the following nasan b'chli v'hoylech v'hikter was chutz l'mkaimai, oy shekamatz nasan b'chli v'hoylech v'hikter choslam koimai, or if everything was choslam koimai, zeu shaloi karev hamatik mitzvasei. These are all examples of scenarios where the machshav of chus l'zmanai, which would create a pigul with a chiv karesh b'deraisa, wouldn't be pertinent because there was something else involved, a machshav of choslam koimai. Now, in the very last case, there's no chus l'zmanai at all. It's all choslam koimai. So anyway, there wouldn't be a machshav of pigul because there was no chus l'zmanai kavanah here at all.
Is this still the Mishnah?
Yes.
I don't see where it ends.
It's going to end in about 10 lines.
But I have no indication in my Gemara.
You don't have an indication over here
that the Mishnah ends.
You know, I'm pointing to the last. I'm pointing to the last word of the Mishnah.
1 second. Raise it. Hang on. How do you like? Oh yes, okay. Wow.
I had to, don't worry. Every single person that learned this Mishnah had the same problem. That Gemara, there was a kid in the way. Okay. I was also wondering the same thing. Okay. So to Gemara weiter. It's like this cold spell feels like it's never going to end, but the Mishnah is going to end. Okay. So Dr. Gemara weiter. What about by the Minchas Choite? We have other potential psulim like Shaloi Lishma. So Minchas Choite or Minchas Kanois, which we said earlier, need to be Lishma. She comes on Shaloi Lishman. So now they already have another psul. Or Shekamat Chustas Manoi and any one of the following avodas were Nasam Bechliba Heilig V'Hikda Shaloi Lishman. So basically what the Mishnah is saying, it doesn't matter if the machshav of Pigul came first and then the carbon was spoiled by another problem, or if first the carbon was spoiled by another problem and then came the machshav of Chutz Manoi, either way, it will not have a din of Pigul. These are all examples. What about you had kavana lechal kazayis b'chutz, or one kazayis b'chutz and kazayis l'mocher? So now you have a machshava of chutz l'mkoymai and a machshava of chutz l'zmanai, like kazayis l'mocher, kazayis b'chutz. So now we're not splitting up avodas. In the avodah of achilas hashirayim, that itself was split. One kazayis of the Shirayim b'chutz, one kazayis of the Shirayim l'mocher, or kazayis b'chutz, lechal kazayis b'chutz, kazayis l'mocher, or kazayis l'mocher, kazayis b'chutz. And Rashi says this is now referring to, they're both referring to one avodah, right? Rashi says, Avabi, shechishev tchila, chutz l'zmanoi, even though his first kavanah was chutz l'zmanoi, nevertheless, the fact that he then had a kavanah of chutz l'mkoymoi would be a chiyuv kares. Okay, how about kechatzi zayis b'chutz, kechatzi zayis l'mocher, or vice versa, kechatzi zayis l'mocher, kechatzi zayis b'chutz? That's possible the ein by kares again because we have another psul mixed in here. Rav Yehuda argues on all of these cases when there was first a machshava of chutz l'zmanoi, which was only followed later by another machshava. Amar B'Yehuda zeklal im machshavas hazman kodma lemachshavas hamakom. If the kavanah of chutz l'zmanoi came before the kavanah of chutz l'mkoymoi, it doesn't matter if it's in the same avodah, it doesn't matter if it's in two separate avodas, it will be pigul v'chayav and olav kares. So he holds the machshav of chutz l'mkoymoi will only spoil the carbon if it came first. But if the machshav of chutz l'zmanoi came first, then the subsequent machshav of chutz l'mkoymoi will not spoil it. It will still be considered shekarev hakarbon k'mitzvasei, karev hamatik k'mitzvasei. In machshavas hamakim kadmon l'machshavas hazman, then possible ve'in beikaris. But the Chum say it doesn't matter. Zev is a possible ve'in beikaris. It doesn't matter if the machshavas hazman came first or if the machshavas hazman came second. Beautiful. Now, Gemara has a very interesting shayla. Ibayilahu, l'divrei ha'omer. Oh, Benzi's here. Benzi, I wanted to wish you a mazel tov on your siyum that you made yesterday. I went and made a bracha on some of your mezainis. Don't worry, just a couple of crumbs from your siyums. I could be mishtatev. Should continue to make many more siyumim. Gesundheit. Ivoilu. L'divrei ha'omer, Shirayim shechasru bein kmitza la'aktorah maktir kaimet alim. We had a discussion in the last couple of days where after the kmitza was made, the Shirayim of the mincha, some of it went missing. So we know the halacha is, we said I think from our Belazar, that you would still be maktir the kaimetz. The kaimetz is kosher. There was a discussion as to whether or not you can eat the Shirayim. So even if you cannot eat the Shirayim, but you could be maktir the kaimetz. The question is, what is the status of those Shirayim? You cannot eat the Shirayim. So if you can't eat the Shirayim, would that be considered karev hamater k'mitzvasoi for the purposes of Pigul? The kaimelon, the oisan Shirayim asurim b'achila, mahu the tehani lehu aktara lemikve inu b'Pigul. So what happened is somebody made the kmitza with the kavana of Pigul, with the kavana to, let's say, eat the Shirayim chutz l'zmanai. That's a standard case of Pigul. But after he made the kmitza, some of the Shirayim went missing. So now you're not going to be able to eat the Shirayim. So even though you had a machshav of Pigul on it, but now the Shirayim is possible because you cannot eat it. Would that now say that it's not Pigul anymore? Because when you're going to be maktir the kmitza on the mizbeach, it will not be maktir the Shirayim, because the Shirayim are going to be usher to eat because some of it went missing. So that is the question. So at first glance, it's not maktir the Shirayim. So if it's not maktir the Shirayim, how could it be a machshav of Pigul? But the next clause of the Shaila actually tells us why we have the Shaila that can work for Pigul. Well, if kinu midei me'ila, the halacha is before the Shirayim of any carbon is released to be eaten by the public or by the Kahanim, it needs a Zrika, it needs the heter. And therefore, if someone has a nov from it, at that point, he's moil bakdish. But we would have to bring an Asham Me'ilos. However, once there's a heter of the Zrika of a carbon, or the Aktar of a Kmitza, there's no Din Me'ilah anymore because it's released. Here you have an interesting scenario. You made the Zrika, but the food was not released to be eaten because since the Shirayim was missing, you cannot eat the Shirayim, the remaining part of the Shirayim. But would the Zrika at least work to say that there's no Din Me'ilah on anymore? She can't eat it, but maybe it would take off the Din Me'ilah. Now, if it does, so now the Zrika in fact was impactful. If the Zrika in fact was impactful, now it would make sense to say that there would be it would be considered karba matir k'mitzvasoi because the matir was matir the Shirayim from an ilah. Can't eat it, but it was matir, and therefore we should say it's karba matir kilchasoi, and therefore it would be Pigul. Amar Ravuna, Sok Ravuna, afilu Rabbi Kiva Amar Zrika my elas leyoytze. What is the halacha of a carbon? You have a carbon, and before the Zrika Saddam, some of the basar that was supposed to be eaten left the Azara, or one of the Emurin left Azara. That's called a psul yoytze, right? Now you cannot put this on the Mizbeach anymore, even if it bring it back in. Im alu lo yerdu, true, but you can't l'chatchila put it on the Mizbeach. Therefore, since it was no heter for anything, there's a din me'ilah on it. What happens if I made this Zrika anyway? Zok Rabbi Kiva, Zrika my elas liyoytze. Zrika will help for a yoytze, even though it's possible. Lagabi, what does it help? Zok Rashi, it helps to be moitiyet midei me'ilah. So if we look at Rashi, I feel Rabbi Kiva Amar, prepare kama de me'ilah, Zrika me elas liyoytze chus l'kaim, l'mahava kadavar sheyesh leheter l'kahanim, u'lemepek midei asham me'ilah. You wouldn't bring an asham me'ilah. Why? Even though you can't place this on the mizbech or you can't eat it, but this rikasoi haitzi asoi midei me'ilah. The Zrika will still say and be mater this meat and say there's no me'ilah on it. Afapish einim materis ba'achila. You wouldn't be able to eat this meat anymore because it was a yoytze from the Azara before the Zrika. But afapikein my elas loy loytzi midei me'ilah. So you see, Zrika helps even for something that's possible that it wouldn't get a heter achila for, but it would help at least to take off the din me'ilah. So Zok Rebbe Lazar, Zok Rebbe Huna, even Rebbe Kiva, who holds that Zrika Me'elis Liyotzes, you might say Zrika should also help for a scenario where some of the Shirayim went missing. No. Zok Rebbe Huna, our case is even worse than Rebbe Kiva's case. Because Hanimi Liyotzes Isa Beinei. Yotzei, all of the carbon is here. There's a technical problem that it went out of the Azara. Somehow the air of Yerushalayim damaged it, which is how Rashi describes it. That's an outside psul. It's an external force. There, the Zrika will help. But when you're missing part of the Shirayim, the psula de gufeyu, that's a blemish within the actual Shirayim itself. Loi mahani le hakdara. Hakdara will not help for it. That was Rav Huna's opinion, that it will not be moil at all. There will be a chiv me'ilah on the Shirayim of this mincha, and this carbon will not be pigul. Amalei Rava told Rav Huna, I actually look at it from the exactly opposite perspective. Adarabba, even according to Rabbi Lazar, who argues on Rabbi Kiva, and says the Zrika does not help for Yotzei. Hanami liyotzei, the lesser b'fnim, it's totally gone. Al v'chasarin, if some Shirayim is missing, but the isa b'fnim, it's always in the walls of the Azara, mahanya le'aktar. So these are two perspectives. What is considered a bigger psul? The fact that it was Yotzei, which is what Rava holds, or the fact that it was Nechsar, which is what Rav Huna holds. So that is our machlokes. Amar Rava, Zok Rava, mina aminallah. How do I know that a psul of chaser would still be impacted by this Rika? Let's see Rashi. Mina aminallah de mahanalu haktara lepigul u'leyitzias me'ilah. How do we know that by nechsar shirayim, even though you'll never be able to eat the rest of the shirayim, the haktara of the koymet is still materit, and therefore there's going to be a chiyuv pigul. That is that's Rav Shita that we're going to be seeking a makor for. Zok the Gemara, that's not we learned. And here's where it's going to get a little complicated. That's not we learned a Mishnah, our Mishnah. Hakaymet es hamincha lachal sheyireh b'chutz or kezayis misheyireh b'chutz. That's how our Mishnah reads, right? That's the beginning of our Mishnah. But when Rabbi Chia quoted this same halacha in a brisa, he modified the lashon of Mishnah. He changed it, and we're going to have to probe as to why he did that. V'tani Rabbi Chia hakaymet es hamincha v'loitani oy kezayis. So if we look at the beginning of our Mishnah, the way Rabbi Chia quoted it was hakaymet es hamincha lechel shiyoreh b'chutz or lahakta kaimsa b'chutz or lahakta levanasa b'chutz. He skips out the oikazayis. And the question is, why would Reb Chia have done that? So the question that we would ask is, my timer, loitani oikazayis. Now, how do we learn oikazayis? You know how we learn oikazayis in the Mishnah? Someone was kaimis to mincha to eat a kazayis of the shirayim. In other words, all of the shirayim were still intact, and al yidei daktaris hakmitza, all of the shirayim became mutter to eat. He had in mind that he's going to eat one kazayis of that shirayim chutz l'zmanai. That would be the pshat as how we learned the Mishnah. But Rabbi Chia felt that when it says oy kazayis b'chutz, it also would connotate another halacha as well, and that is lav kegoyin shechasu shirayim v'kavalu hakazayis. So let's have a look with that in mind. With that in mind, let's have a look and see how well the Mishnah is going to read. The hakaymet is hamincha lechol shirei b'chutz, because all of its shirayim was intact, everything is pristine. There's a chiyuv pigul. But oy kazayis kaimsa b'chutz, oy kazayis mishirei b'chutz, or only a kazayis of the shirayim b'chutz. So let's think about that. Maybe that means a case where all of the shirayim got lost except for a kazayis. That's what also could be fartaged into that lotion. Now that wouldn't be a problem. Again, that wouldn't be a problem if it was nechsar, because like we're going to say on one side of the shaila, even though the mincha was chaser and you're not allowed to eat any of the shirayim, the aktorah will still be poyalois on the shirayim that at least there's no din me'ila on it, and it's still considered karba mater kachasei. But the problem is, let's read the next line. Lahakta kaimsa b'chutz, a kezayis kaimsa b'chutz. A kaimitz that goes partially missing is completely possible. So you couldn't have possibly read oy kezayis kaimsa b'chutz. So Zok Reb Chia, since oy kezayis mishireh b'chutz could also be understood as a scenario where that's all of the shirayim that was remaining, and if I try to explain that parallel case in the next line, it wouldn't make any sense, because if you only took a kazayis of the kaimitz, means part of the kaimitz went missing. If part of the kaimitz went missing, the entire korban is possible. So since that lashon of kazayis wouldn't fit in perfectly, he just took the whole thing out. But Reb Chia's mindset is that technically, if there was only a kazayis of shirayim left, it would become pigul. That's exactly what Rava's argument is, that even though the shirayim was chaser and you're not allowed to eat any of the shirayim, a machshav of pigul will still be valid because it's called nikra v'shireh b'chutz. Okay, so let's have a look inside and see the lashon hagemara. V'tani Reb Chia hakayimit is a mincha v'loitani oikazayis. My time v'loitani oikazayis. Lav kigoyin shechasru shirayim v'kamalu akazayis. It would also include and mean that case as well, where there was only a kazayis of the shirayim remaining. V'chivan de b'matan kli b'hiluch uv'aktar l'masni lei. Since he decided to omit oikazayis by any of the other avodas that were discussed in the second case of the Mishnah, where we're discussing the psul of pigul that could have occurred in any of the other avodas, where it doesn't mention oikazayis, it just says lechol dover, but it doesn't mention kazayis at all. He figured there it doesn't say, turning on Talmud Beis, oikazayis ashirayim b'kmitza nami lechol shirayim loitoni oikazayis. The gears isn't so good over here. It should really be mad, since he doesn't say to kmitza nami lechol shirayim loitoni oikazayis. It doesn't say oikazayis by the kmitza either. Now, by the kmitza, it's obvious that what it means is the whole kmitza is there, but he was only going to be makter kazayis b'chutz because the whole kmitza wasn't there. The whole korban is puzzled. But since it didn't fit in by shirayim, he decided not to have it at all. But in principle, he agrees with the fact that if there was only a kazayis of the shirayim remaining, it would still allow the korban to become pugul. The Katani Seifa, and the Seifa of our Mishnah says, which Reb Chia repeats, Pigul v'chayavna lakaris. Alma, you see exactly Rava Shita, Mahanya lehu aktara. The aktara helped to be matter even the remaining kazayis of the shirayim, and therefore the korban becomes pigul. Amalei Abaye, that's not necessarily the right explanation as to why Reb Chia omitted the oikazayis, because you could very easily come up with another explanation. So Amalei Abaye la'olam loy mahanya. Really, the Reb Chia would hold that it doesn't work, and in fact, if there was only a kazayis of the shirayim missing, remaining, if there's only guys shirayim remaining, there's no din pigul here. So oy bazoi, why and pshat in the Mishnah has to be only that everything is remaining, but its kavanah was just to be maktir a kazayis of the shirayim, or to eat a kazayis of the shirayim chutz l'zmanai. So why did he omit? Why did he omit the oy kazayis? Because Hamani Rabbi Lazar, he maybe Reb Chia holds like Rabbi Lazar, and Rabbi Lazar told us the following: Ditnan hakoymeitz v'alavoina v'aketaris uminchas kohanim uminchas koy Mashiach uminchas nesachim. All of these korbanos shehikriv me'achas mehen kezayis b'chutz chayiv. The halacha is, if you're makav a kezayis b'chutz of any of these korbanos, you're chayiv al shchutei chutz, right? We know there's an iser koros to be makriv a carbon b'chutz. So you didn't have to be makriv the whole carbon b'chutz. Even if you were only makriv, even if you're only makriv part of the carbon b'chutz, you're going to be chayiv. But Rebbe Lazar poiter achi yaakov es kuloi. Rebbe Lazar holds that the whole thing you have to be maktir b'chutz in order to be over. So you see, Rebbe Lazar holds a half a hektar doesn't count. If you were maktir something b'chutz, you're not chayiv. You know why? Because being maktir something b'fnim wouldn't work. You have to be maktir everything in order for it to be a proper hektarah. So that explains beautifully why he wouldn't have said oikazayis over here. Rabbi Lezer pointer achi yakter es kuloi. V'chivan de v'kmitza. He takes off the hektarah. V'chivan de v'kmitza loy masni lei oikazayis mikumsa b'chutz. By the kmitza, he couldn't say oikazayis mikumsa b'chutz. You know why he couldn't say that? Because it wouldn't be true. Unless you're marking the whole koimis b'chutz, it wouldn't be a good akrava, and therefore it wouldn't be pigul. So Shirayim nami loy masni lei oikazayis. So this is very interesting. Rava's theory was that Rab Chia couldn't say oikazayis mishirayim b'chutz, and since he couldn't say oikazayis mishirayim, he also omitted oikazayis mikmitza. Rab Abayis is suggesting exactly the opposite. It couldn't say oikazayis mikmitza because that's not a avoida at all. That wouldn't make it pigul. Once it couldn't say oikazayis mikmitza, it doesn't say oikazayis mishirayim. So you don't have a raya anymore from Rab Chia that he agrees with you that even though a kazayis of the Shirayim remains, it would still be a proper carbon and it would be considered karv hamater k'mitzvasei. Frag the Gemara, Ira Belazar, Hai lahakter kumtza, it would be lahakter kumtza levanatami bayilei. Because Rabbi Lazar doesn't just hold that you have to be makriv the entire kmitza for it to be a kosher kmitza. Rabbi Lazar holds unless you're makriv the kaimitz together with the levina, it's not a kosher haktara at all. So therefore, there would not be a chiyuv pigul unless your kavanah b'shas the kmitza was that I'm going to be maktir the full kmitza together with the full levina b'chutz or with a mechshav of pigul. The Tanan we learned. Hakoymet ba'alavoina shehikar ves echad mehen b'chutz chayiv according to the Tanakama, but Rabbi Lazar poiter achi yaakov eshnayim, because it's one thing. It's not two separate avodas. The aktora of the kmitza, one avoda. The aktora of the lavoina, another avoda. It's one avoda. So in your machshava of pigul b'shas the kmitza, you have to have kavana that you're going to be maktir the kaimitz together with the lavoina chutz l'zmanai. If that wasn't your kavanah was only to be maktir the kaimitz chutz l'zmanai, so that's not a kosher avoda. Not a kosher avoda wouldn't make a carbon pigul. So to Gemara, Einachanami, lo nitzracha ella lekaimitz the minchas chayte. The minchas chayte does not have levina at all. So, but a minchas chayte, if the kain shastik mitzah had in mind to be maktir the whole kaimitz chutz l'zmanai, that would be pigul. Because that's a proper aktara, because that doesn't need to have levina with it. So, frag the Gemara, are you telling me the ich vil tanel hasheminon koimetz the minchas chayte? Are you telling me that this whole Mishnah that's discussing this whole issue and doesn't mention the aktara shalavina as part of the equation? It's the whole thing. You're talking only about one unique, specific case of a minchas chayte. Zakmar in. That's exactly what we're saying. V'chen ki yasser avdimi Omer Rabbi Lazar, kaimetz the minchas chaytehu. He also learned that, our Mishnah is discussing the kaimetz and the minchas chayte, which does not require levina. For Rabbi Lazar, and it would be going according to Rabbi Lazar, which is how Abaye understood Rabbi Chia's brisa. So we've totally diffused the raya that Rava had. So Rava had a raya to himself that the fact that you're making the haktaras hakaimetz will be matter the shirayim lagabe it not having din me'il anymore, and lagabe making it a proper hakravas hamatir to make it into an ishakaris. Rava no longer has a raya to that, but he still maintains his shita. Zok the Gemara hadar amar Rava lav milsid amri. Rava ended up backing out of his whole halacha. The Tanya we learned kodesh kodeshim hu we learned by the lechem aponim. By the lechem aponim, the Torah refers to it as kodesh kodesh. Shemu shem nifrisa achas mechaloisel. The Gersa changes. Shem nifrisa achas mechaloisel. If one of the chalois of the lechem aponim broke, kulon pesulos. They're all going to be possible. So we make a diak from this brisa. Dafke, if it broke and it's not here, hayotzis, if it just left the azara but it's still intact, hani the ikakavoy will be ksheros. So we have a dik from a brisa that in fact yotze is less of a problem than if we lost some of the shirayim. Rava's whole shita was that yotze is worse than if some of the shirayim goes missing, and therefore, if by yotze it's going to, the Rizrika is going to work to be moitiv b'dei meila, if the shirayim is chasher, it should work as well. But from this brisa we have a diuk that in fact yotzis is better than shirayim, so Rava's whole shita evaporated. Man shamas lei the Omar zrika me'elas liyote. Who's the shita who holds zrika helps for yote? That was Rabbi Kiva. Vika Amar, and the brisa that must be going according to Rabbi Kiva that says that even though part of the bread was yote, the zrika or the hakravas alavoina, which is the equivalent of the zrika by the lechem upon him, will still be matter the chalois that remained in the azara. Yet by nivras aloi, yet if the part of lechem upon missing, even Rabbi Kiva would be moida that would be possible, and the aktar wouldn't help for it, and he wouldn't be able to eat the rest of the chalas. Amalei Abaye, mikatani hayotzis. It doesn't say you're making a diak. The diak says nivras kulam psulos, hayotzis is not psulos. Doesn't say that. Maybe the diak that you should make is dilmahan nitmas hanach ksheres. Maybe the diak to make is that if some of the bread became tamei, the rest are kosher. My time of the maratza tzitz. There's a special thing of retweet tzitz by a carbon tzibur b'tuma. Avo yotzes loy. But maybe yotzes loy, meaning if it was yotzei, the zrika won't work for it, meaning it's not going according to Rabbi Kiva. Maybe v'Rabbi Elazar he. Maybe it's going according to Rabbi Elazar. The Amar ain't zrika ma'elos liyotzei. Uvedinu the boile lemisni nami yotzes. But if that's the case, in the brisa of the lechem aponim, where it says nifrasa achas men kulam psulos, it should have said shem nifrasa or yoitza achas men kulam psulos. Because Rabbi Elazar holds if some of the bread left azara, the whole thing is going to be possible. Why didn't the pick yotzes as well? But I think it's on you nifrasa. You know why the Brisa picked nifrasa as the example that tells that everything's possible? Hakamash malon the afilu nifrasa the isa b'fnim. It broke off, but everything else is remaining inside. Loi mahanya loi haktara. Haktara doesn't help. Kol shekain by yotzes it wouldn't help because it left the azara. Aval Rabbi Kiva the Amar Zrika ma'elos liyotzei, but according to Rabbi Kiva holds Zrika helps for yotzei. Afilu chisarin nami mahanya loi haktara. Maybe for a chisarin haktara would help as well. So you don't have a raya either way. So basically, the raya in one direction to Rava was diffused. The raya against Rava was diffused. So we remain with the shaila. Once the mincha is also to be eaten, because some of the shirayim went missing, do we say that the haktaras hakaimitz will affect it and take off the didmeila and also allow it to become pigul or not? Lechol kechatzi zayis ulahaktu kechatzi zayis. So he didn't have kavana to eat a kazayis of chutz l'zmanai or to be maktik zayis. He wants to be mitzaref achila of a person taktora on the mizbeach. Kosher will be kosher she'ein achila v'aktar mitzarfin because they're not mitzaref. Zok Gemara time of the lechol ulahakter. That's only because one's achila, one's aktora. What about a lechol of a lechol? What if you had kavana to eat half a kazayis of shirayim, chutz l'zmanai, and to eat half a kazayis of the koimitz? So he's eating both. They're both achilas. Halechol v'lechol dover sheindar kelechol, like the koimitz is the ein dover is the dover sheindar kelechol mitzaref. It's a mashim budi mitzaref. That's the deek you can make from our Mishnah. The problem is vakatani reisha, but the earlier Mishnah that we learned, it says beferish lechol dover sheindar kelechol lahaktir dover sheindar kelahaktir dover sheindar kelechol in, which will be the shirayim sheindar kelechol, but the koimitz itself loy. So we have a stira. If he had kavanah to eat something that you were supposed to be makav on the mizbeach, would that contribute to machshav of pigul? So we have a stira. Our Mishnah holds it would be mitzar it would be mitzar to machshav of pigul, and the first Mishnah holds it wouldn't. Montana, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Hamani Rabbi Eliezer. Our Mishnah would have to be going according to Rabbi Eliezer, because we were medayik from our Mishnah that even if he was going to eat part of the kmitza, chutz l'zmamay would be a machshava pigul, and Rabbi Eliezer holds who the Amar mechashvin me'achilas adam lachilas mizbeach u'mechilas mizbeach lachilas adam. One will be mitzaref to the other. Titnan we learned hakoy mitzvah mincha with a machshava pigul lechol davar she'ein darkei lechol ulahaktir davar she'ein darkei lahaktir. Kosher, that's not a good machshava pigul according to the Tanakama, but for Rabbi Eliezer Paisel, because Rabbi Eliezer holds as long as you're eating or being maktir, even if it's something that doesn't require achila or it's something that doesn't require aktorah, it would still aser al pigul. Abai Amar afilu tem rabbanon. Maybe we could even say that our mission is going according to the rabbanon, where an achila of the kmitza would not be mitzaref to pigul. But loy tema, don't make the dik that you started off with. Don't say dafka lechol or lahakir is not mitzaref. Halechol v'lechol davar shein darkei lechol. That's not how you should be medayik. Just say ema halechol v'lechol davar shein darkei lechol. The dik you should make is if you're going to eat a half a gazayis of shirayim and then another half a gazayis of shirayim, so both of the achilas are things that you're supposed to eat. That's where it'll be a chiyuv pigul. In fact, tomorrow, why would I need our Mishnah here to say such a chiddush? Ha kamash malon, my kamash malon. Ha jabahedek yitanila. That's exactly what the first Mishnah says. Lechal kazayis b'chutz ukazayis l'mocher. We're being mitzaref two achilas of a kazayis that are we have two that are both things that are davar shadach lechal, or kazayis l'mocher, kazayis b'chutz. Or even kachatizayis b'chutz, kachatizayis l'mocher. So you see, you're mitzaref two things that are darkei lechel, or kachatizayis l'mocher, or kachatizayis b'chutz posel vein b'karet. Zok to Gemara, hasu lomali. Why would I need this Mishnah to tell me the very same chiddush again that you could be mitzaref two dvarim shadakei lechel? I lechel v'lechel. Davar she'ein darkei lechol, kamash malon the mitzaref. And if you want to say that it's teaching us that you're mitzaref something that even though it's not darkei lechol, it's mitzaref like the kmitza, we know that's not true. Me'reisha shmat, we know we already proved from the ratio that wouldn't work. Dafka davar she'darkei lechol, you can't be mitzaref a half a gazais of shirayim with a half a gazais of kmitza, because the half a gazais of kmitza is not darkei lechol. Zok to Gemara, me'reisha shmas mina. So let's skip the brackets. I lechol ulahaktir. If you're talking about lechol ulahaktir, meaning a half a gazais you're going to eat of shirayim, and a half a gazais you're going to be maktir of kaimetz, midiyuka the reisha shmas mina. We know from a dika the reisha that would not be pigul. I don't need the second Mishnah to tell me that. The hashta, it says in the previous Mishnah, ma lechol v'lechol davar shein darkei lechol amrit loy mitzaref madech eating half a kaimetz. Madech eating half a gazais of the kaimetz wouldn't be mitzaref to eating a half a gazais of the shirayim. Lechol v'lahakter miboya. If even eating the kaimetz won't contribute to pigul, surely being maktir the kaimetz, which is a completely different action, would not be mitzaref with achilas hashirayim. Dr. Morin, it's still a chiddush. Lechol v'lahakter tzrichalei. I do need a chiddush to tell me that the aktar of half a kaimetz is not mitzaref with the achila of half a gazais of shirayim. Why would I have thought that they combine either two different things? Because sal gadai techamina. If you ate a half a kaimetz, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing with it. So that's why it's not mitzaref. He has a proper kavanah of eating a chatzah of shirayim, and he has a proper kavanah of being maktir a half a kaimetz or half a kazayis of the kaimitz on the mizbeach. So each machshava in and of itself is valid because you're doing the right thing with what you're thinking about. Emel etztarif, maybe you would actually be mitzarif to half a kazayis of achila to half a kazayis of aktorah. Kamash malon, our last mishnah that it's not mitzarif. So Baruch Hashem, we now finish the first parak of Menachos, and Bili Neder hadin lachal Menachos, Bili Neder hadin lachal Menachos, Bili Neder hadin lachal Menachos. A little complex.